Russian oil plants ablaze in Mars for several days in a row. American sanctions against Russia finally started working under the new administration, and an interview with a new guest to our studio about the future of Ukraine-US relations. This and more today. Let's go. Overnight, several Russian regions, including Nizhny Novgorod, Smolensk, Tver, and Bryansk, reported drone strikes, triggering fires and air defense responses. According to the HUR source, which gave comments to the Kiev Independent publication, the Lukoil oil depot in Kstova was targeted by 4 drones, all of which successfully struck the facility, causing significant damage. The source described the refinery as a site that supports the activities of the Russian occupation forces and confirmed the attack took place around midnight local time. The facility is located approximately 800 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. This strategy of systemic attacks against the oil infrastructure of the aggressor follows several possible goals. First is to strain and exhaust Russian air defenses by carrying out strikes in all accessible parts of the Federation, put Russian air defenses out of Ukraine, as most of the combat-ready systems are right now here, trying to hunt for F-16 jets. In both scenarios, it is the occupying force that is going to take economic and logistical losses. A recent wave of long-range strikes has targeted multiple Russian oil refineries, significantly disrupting the country's fuel production capacity. Between January 24th and 29th, Ukrainian forces carried out attacks on 3 major refineries: Ryazan oil refinery, 17.1 million tons of capacity; Novoshakhtinsk oil products plant processing capacity of 5 million tons; and Lukoil refinery processing of 17 million tons. The Ryazan oil refinery and Lukoil are the third and fourth largest oil refineries in Russia in terms of capacity. If these facilities sustain severe damage, Russia could lose nearly 40 million tons of oil processing capacity, accounting for approximately 15% of its total refining capacity. These strikes could have a substantial impact on Russia's ability to refine oil and sustain its war economy. Kyiv considers oil refineries legitimate military targets as Russia's fossil fuel revenues help finance its ongoing war. Earlier this week, Ukraine confirmed striking the Ryazan oil refinery in an overnight drone attack on January 24th. The facility subsequently suspended operations due to damage, Reuters reported, citing 2 industry sources. And while these attacks continue, we can be sure that the Russian oil sector won't be able to recover fast, and after a highly likely drop in oil prices soon, will it even be profitable for the aggressor to recover these plants at all? American sanctions are finally working as intended. China and India suspended shipments of Russian oil from the Shadow Fleet after the new US administration took action against this evasion scheme and closed the Panama ports for them. With a maximum pressure campaign, US President Donald Trump may be poised to deliver the financial blow that forces Vladimir Putin to negotiate. Just a week into his presidency, Trump has hinted at his approach to Russian sanctions. In a recent Truth Social post, he called on Putin to settle now and stop this, I quote, ridiculous war. He warned that failure to reach a deal would leave him no other choice but to impose harsh taxes, tariffs, and sanctions on Russian exports to the US and other countries. This direct threat not only targets the Kremlin but also nations still engaged in trade with Russia. Trump's history shows he is no stranger to economic coercion. His administration previously leveraged sanctions against Iran, Venezuela, and North Korea. He also views deal-making as a personal strength, needing to secure a win, avoid appearing weak, and ideally generate economic benefits for the United States. After 3 years of escalating sanctions by Ukraine's allies, Russian economy is feeling the strain. High inflation, stagflation, and a worsening economic outlook. Yet Moscow continues to sustain its war machine largely through oil revenues. Western sanctions have been slow and cautious, allowing Russia time to adapt. This measured approach has been more of an irritation than a decisive blow. Trump, however, appears ready to change that dynamic. He recognizes that Russia's Achilles heel is its own exports, because to provide the lifeline for the Kremlin's war effort. Without this revenue, Moscow's financial position would quickly deteriorate. Trump has already urged OPEC to lower oil prices, arguing that cheaper energy would cripple Russia's ability to wage war at all. He even suggested that OPEC's decision to maintain high prices makes them to a certain extent responsible for prolonging the conflict. This signal the early formation of a potential Trump-brokered deal. Trump's latest claims and actions suggested that he is prepared to unleash every economic tool at his disposal: sanctions, tariffs, and trade restrictions to target Russian oil sales. So far, Moscow has maintained much of its energy market. Aside from losing buyers among Ukraine's closest allies in the G7, Trump could launch an aggressive sanctions campaign aimed at isolating Russia further by pressuring other nations to cut ties. Where those countries will buy their oil and gas from, Trump's answer is clear: the United States, now a major oil and gas exporter, with new orders from the president to boost extraction of energy resources by forcing nations to abandon Russian energy. Trump envisions boosting US exports while simultaneously strangling the Kremlin's revenue stream. Peace and trade in his ultimate goal. As we can see, it is a goal for many nations in the world too, if it helps restore the rules-based world order and business as usual without dictators thinking they are capable of capturing the world with force. And today we have Mr. Jason J. Smart, an American political advisor and PhD. Greetings.
Hello, great to see you today.
I'm really glad to see you in our studio because you can tell us about the recent changes in United States politics regarding the economic and humanitarian aid to different countries of the world, including US aid projects. Many media in Ukraine are working on those flows of grant money from the US aid, and right now they are on the edge of their existence. Can you tell me a little bit more if it is a reason to be worried, or it's just a new negotiation, new administration taking place?
I think there's really nothing to be worried about. The fact of the matter is that every new administration is going to have its new rules. And in this case, we see that the administration is interested in doing what they promised during the campaign. And one of those things was to carefully audit and check all of the programs that have been implemented by Biden or other administrations to make sure that they corresponded with what was, in the eyes of Donald Trump, the interest of the United States and American taxpayers. So, what does it mean in real terms? I think that we'll probably see in the coming weeks that there'll be a lot of different things that they find that they don't agree with, whether it was just money that was mal-spent or was not necessary or did very little to really help. But after cutting those things, I think we'll probably return and we'll see a lot of these programs come back to life. I don't think this will be long term. Most everybody thinks that it will be, as the White House has said, about 3 months. But after that period is over, I think a lot of the programs will return.
Mhm. Okay, so the new administration of American president has activated sanctions, and they seem to me personally more effective than all of the sanctions packages before because they really impacted the shadow fleet right now. Panama ports have stopped aiding the Russian shadow fleet with oil, and for now, at least for now, China and India have suspended buying oil from Russian tankers. Can you say me about this sanctions policy of the new administration, and will it bear fruit in real life?
Absolutely the case. And what we see that's sort of interesting is that a lot of these countries, I believe, really understand that Donald Trump will follow through with what he has said, which is if you go against the will of the United States, he'll hold you accountable for that. And it's not just India that we've seen recently and other countries that will probably no longer be buying Russian oil. Look at the impact that he has had, for instance, in Latin America, when some countries, namely Colombia, refused to take back illegal immigrants who he's seeking to deport. He immediately announced that he would put a 25% tariff on all goods coming from Colombia. Within minutes, the president of Colombia then changed his opinion and allowed the migrants to be deported back to Colombia. I think this is sort of the tough power that we should expect to see from the Trump administration for the next 4 years. The use of force in order to coerce those who decide to go against the will of the US.
It is an interesting emphasizement from you because powers through strength was a pre-election promise of the Donald Trump administration. Not only him, but all of the people who made the cabinet with him. And it is curious that this policy might not only fear of the enemies of the rules-based order of the United States and the United States interests, and as well as Ukrainian interests, because Russia is waging a war against Ukraine, and it is in the American interest that Ukraine survives this war. But also, I see a pattern that this stimulates other United States and Ukrainian allies that are caught like just in between. European countries like France, like Denmark, with all this Greenland, the Greenland collision right now, and the discussion. And do you see this as a positive shift in the European, let's say not defense policies, but the European defense pattern?
Well, listen, Europe for a long time has needed to do more than simply rely on the United States for its security. It's very clear that Europe has both the capacity and the need to change its strategy. Now, it's been very convenient for decades to be able to rely on the US to be the leader on this. But as time goes on, we see that's simply not a tenable solution. So as Europe goes ahead, I think this will be profoundly positive for them to be able to develop their own infrastructure and their own capacity to be able to fend off foreign threats. And of course, we talk most often about Russia. There's a very important angle here as well. The US, going back to about the Obama administration, has put a higher emphasis on Asia, specifically China, of course, as being a long-term threat in the United States. The Europeans are much better positioned to deal with Russia than the United States, which is further away, but is much closer to Asia and to China than are the Europeans. So, in this sort of a strategy, it's mutually beneficial to both sides, the Europeans and the Americans, because they can both leverage the strength of their location to be able to counter the threats that we will face in the coming decades.
I have literally no reason to argue with you. I agree on almost all that you say. And I must remark that we have still some leaders in European countries that are extremely friendly to Russia, namely Robert Fico and Viktor Orban, the prime ministers of Slovakia and Hungary. Do you see soon a fast resolution of their position, a change in their position, maybe, if such policies, such policy of European self-sustainment and self-defense, not relying on the United States, will continue?
I think in the case of Orban, the relationship's much closer to the United States, specifically to Donald Trump. Now, in the case of the Slovak leader, I don't think it's quite so close. In fact, I don't think that there is an existent relationship. So, going ahead, what does this all really mean? I think that we're going to see that Donald Trump will support many of the things that people like Orban want for the domestic audiences. For instance, if we're talking about things such as pushing off some of the European Union's rules and regulations about schooling or about personal affairs, I can see him supporting that because he doesn't support a large government. But at the same time, would he support a Hungary or Slovakia taking decisions that puts at risk the security of Europe and thereby puts at risk the security of the United States? I think not. I think that's very clear. So going ahead, I think that this will be a very interesting dynamic to see the transatlantic relationship develop over the next 4 years.
Well, we shall see. Maybe you have some final remarks because all of my questions you have answered them so good, and it's really really an interesting discussion. So maybe you have some remarks or some things you would like to pay attention to, or you have some observations on what's going on and where.
So overall, I think that we have to look at what's going on in the United States through the prism of the United States. Of course, everybody always tries to understand what impact will Trump's decision have on Ukraine, for instance. But really, it's very limited because we're not starting the equation correctly. If we want to really get to the bottom of it, understand what's going on domestically in the United States. So domestically in the United States, the population has said that they're very upset with the current situation of our country. They're upset the way that they live. They feel that economically they're disadvantaged. They're just generally very unhappy. And they feel that the government was badly managed for many, many years now. So their hope is that Donald Trump will realign the country with the interests of the American people. So what's that mean for Ukraine? What does it mean for other countries? It means that it's very important to understand what's going on in America and to there phrase the debate or frame the debate in a way that argues that what is going on, for instance, supporting Ukraine, is something that actually directly helps the American people. It has to be looked at as not what Ukraine deserves or should have, but this is something that is being done and it will help the American people to help Ukraine. Because if it's through that framework, it is something that will get support in the United States. But it's looked at just as an extraordinary gift being given away by the American people, it won't survive in this new environment. So it's important to understand the framework in which we're working today.
Absolutely agree with you. Political pragmatism and real advantages of this or that support of the country from the United States. As you have said earlier, Russia's victory is clearly not in the interest of the United States because it will endanger the whole of Europe and NATO alliance, just like a front against Russia. And what I see is if Ukraine can position itself pragmatically as useful for the United States military and defense interests, that everything will be fine. Am I correct?
Absolutely the case. I think it's going to be exactly like that. It just depends if Europe is able to work together with the United States in the new paradigm which exists. We can no longer think that it's like the past because it's not. That's forever gone. We must deal with the paradigm shift that's occurred and deal with it correctly if we wish to see true change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smart. It was a pleasure, a true pleasure to interview you and to have you in our studio today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hope to see you again.
You too.
Well, that is all for today, folks. Hope you really liked the episode and the new guest we had. I'm glad to be back to the studio after a while. Remember to hit that like and subscribe button below. It really helps us to continue our work and deliver the news of the free world directly from Ukraine to you. Have a nice day and don't let propaganda win.